friends, welcome to this new episode. Today we have a tremendous story where a mother, along with her son, experienced moments of real terror in a house while they were on vacation. But not only that, stay until the end because possibly this story is related to a famous legend that we all know. Before we begin, I invite you as always to my secondary channel Who Was, where tomorrow Sunday we will have a new episode and it is really unmissable. There are also many more to see. This one that is on screen, I recommend it because it is a tremendous case that you surely do not know. And also know that in a pinned comment and in the description I leave all the important links. Friends, thank you very much for the support as always. And now, yes, we start with this new paranormal story. Enjoy it. My name is Silvana. I was born in San Miguel, province of Buenos Aires, but due to life circumstances, we have been living with my family in the United States for over 30 years, more precisely in Gilbert, Arizona. Although initially we were settled in the state of Utah, and it is possible that this event, the one I'm going to tell you about now, is related to another story, a very well-known legend that, from my point of view, has nothing to do with us. Of course, I would like to know what people think after they finish listening to my experience. This happened to us in the year 2017 when we lived, as I said before, in the state of Utah, and for reasons that are not relevant, our vacations at that time were not in this country. We would get in the car and drive more than 1,400 kilometers to our destination, which was Puerto Peñasco in the state of Sonora, Mexico. At that time, our oldest son had gone on vacation with his friends, so it was just my husband, my 15-year-old son, the youngest, our little dog, and me.
We arrived extremely tired from the very long journey one day as the evening was falling, getting dark. We had rented a small apartment that was on the first floor, built on top of a little house. A gentleman, an American who had bought this land, had a main house, quite normal. On top of this house, he had built the apartment that we rented. And then he had like other little apartments built on the same land that people rented to go on vacation. This house was not attached to the beach, as we usually go on other occasions. It was in the middle of the town, in any neighborhood, so to speak. That is, it was not in the tourist area, but Puerto Peñasco is super quiet. People are very friendly. You can walk on the street at any time. So we saw this place. It was a few blocks from the beach. We liked the photos. We rented this place. It was super cheap for us too. We had 2 weeks to go, and to make such a trip, we always stayed between 10 days and 2 weeks when we went.
We arrived at the little house at nightfall, exhausted. After settling in, my husband couldn't stand it. He grabbed his belongings and he went to the coast. Obviously, he invited us to go with him, but the reality is that we had no intention of going out. We wanted to rest. He is a fishing fanatic, and Puerto Peñasco is just the ideal place for this practice because the conditions are right, plus the excellent overall atmosphere in this place. So he just grabbed his rods, the suitcase, and the problem we had that time was that by arriving late to Puerto Peñasco, we didn't get to buy a chip for the cell phone. And while we had Wi-Fi in the little house, my husband would be out of touch when he left and didn't have signal. I clarify this, which is a simple detail, because when leaving the country and entering Mexico, our telephone service automatically had no more validity. Once my husband left, we tidied up everything, ate something, watched TV, and went to bed. I fell asleep almost immediately, while Matthias stayed up playing with a Nintendo console he had brought with him. We were still with the light on, the air conditioning, the TV, and even also at a low volume, and it happened.
Something.
I woke up quite startled because my son had grabbed me by the shoulders and was shaking me while asking me, "Mommy, Mommy, are you wearing socks?" Perhaps this is not yet understood, and I emphasize that I also understood absolutely nothing at the moment. I had fallen asleep so deeply that when my son woke me up asking this, I didn't know what was going on. I was very tired in a house that wasn't mine, at a different time than usual for sleeping, in my case, so the situation was at least confusing. At the moment, I imagined that Matthias had had some sleepwalking episode because precisely when he was quite young, it had happened to him once or twice to wake up and talk in his sleep, but it was not so because he was totally awake and not only that, very scared.
So I managed to wake up a bit and he follows me. This boy had a look of desperation that I can't explain to you. He keeps asking me if I have socks on. I was still wearing the shirt and shorts I had traveled in, and I didn't have socks on. I was wearing flip-flops, but I was covered with a sheet, so he didn't know if I had socks on or not. And I tell him, no, I don't have socks on. Why are you asking me if I have socks on? Then he sits on the bed. He was as white as a sheet, and he tells me the following.
It turned out that he was in the room intended for him, sitting on the bottom of the bunk bed preparing to sleep, and he saw something that surprised him, but then it terrified him. My son is very tall, and it's not a minor detail because while he was sitting, and thanks to his height, he didn't have a total view upwards, and now you're going to understand why I say this, because it was something impressive. He was sitting as I told you, and he saw a woman who entered the room, walked to the foot of the bunk bed and stayed there for a few seconds, and because of this height issue I mentioned, he couldn't see her face, meaning he was only seeing her from the neck down. Some black hair fell over her shoulders. She was wearing a slightly yellowish nightgown, from what he could notice, and the main detail with which this sequence began was that she wasn't wearing any shoes, she had socks on. My son at that moment asked, "Did something happen, Mommy?" Because he clearly thought it was me. After those words, that woman turned around and slowly walked out of the room. She went out to the hallway and turned towards where my bedroom or the bathroom was. The most chilling detail was that as he moved away from the bed, Matthias could clearly see more details of this woman. She had black hair, short white socks, her skin tone was quite pale, that yellowish nightgown and something tremendous. She seemed to be all wet from head to toe. Matthias got up, peeked down the hallway and saw this woman or whatever go into the bathroom. He went to the bathroom and found the door closed as we always left it. He knocked, calling for me because even though the appearance was different, he was still trying to make sense of this and believed that this woman was me and that something was happening to me because I didn't speak to him. I was walking in the middle of the night in a strange way, so he was worried. Since no one answered from inside the bathroom, he opened the door and then yes. He was scared like never before in his entire life because he found the room completely empty. This woman had literally disappeared and could hardly have left through a tiny window that served as ventilation.
That's when he turns his head. I had the door open and he sees me lying down and realizes it wasn't me, but at the same time he wanted to make sense of what had happened and thought maybe it was me and he hadn't seen how I went to bed instead of the bathroom. But he distinctly remembered that I had socks on. That's why he was so insistent on knowing if I had socks on. Well, Andres tells me this, and I'm not a very, how can I put it, sensitive person to seeing things, you know. That doesn't usually happen to me. My son has had many experiences since he was a child. But let me clarify that he's not the type of person who likes to talk about it. He's not the type of person who seeks to have these experiences. On the contrary, there was a time when he would ask God to please not allow him to keep seeing these things because it affected him a lot, you know. We always believed him and always supported him in the best way we could, especially when something happened to him at night and he was scared and we would stay with him or we would throw a mattress next to our bed, things like that.
It was a horrible situation, and as I told you, I'm not a person sensitive to these things, but at that moment and for the first time in my life, I felt that the air was heavy, the atmosphere was different, danger was perceived. Without visual input, they remained mere sensations until that moment when something else occurred. We were with the lights on, the door closed, lying in bed and covered. We tried to chat about other things to clear our heads, and at one point, while we were silent, lying down and waiting for my husband to return, I feel someone touch my right foot. It was as if a hand first grabbed me, then squeezed me, then began to tap with its fingers, like when one is impatient for something. It wasn't a muscular issue where maybe we feel some nerve stimulus in some part of the body, something that surely we all know. This was really terrifying because at one point I felt 3 hits and they stopped. Seconds later it repeated and it repeated it. And it repeated. Logically I looked, but there was no one, at least not visible. I didn't tell my son anything and just stayed still, trying to ignore this, so as not to give it importance, not to give it entity. And apparently it worked because a few minutes passed and everything calmed down. My husband arrived at 2-something in the morning and found us awake, scared and desperate to tell him everything we had experienced. He listened to us in astonishment and feeling bad, obviously, for having gone so many hours without a phone and not knowing anything about what his family was going through at that time.
And you know that in that apartment, during the day it was one thing, at night the atmosphere changed, it became heavy, ugly, I don't know how to explain it to you. It felt like something was changing in the air. And well, time passed. And it turns out that one day my son comes and tells me, "Mommy, do you know what I heard?" And I hadn't associated it with this, he tells me. He was listening to stories of the weeping woman. And it turns out that my son Matthias has a Mexican friend who confirmed this to him. And it is said that a cry is heard before the supposed weeping woman appears. And that when the cry or the scream or the lament that is heard, when you hear it far away, it means that the weeping woman is near. And when you feel that cry, that lament close, it means that the weeping woman is far away. We had never heard that before. And my son just realized with this information and remembered that that night, before seeing this woman at the foot of his bed, he felt a scream like a lament in the distance there in the neighborhood where we were. And suddenly this entity appeared. I wouldn't know what to call it. But I didn't want to label or tag this as a story of the weeping woman because for us, at least at the moment it happened, we didn't associate it with that. And then we were left thinking, yes, maybe it was the weeping woman. I don't know.
That's why I left this fact for the end, because I would love to know what you think about what happened to us. Was it the weeping woman? Or was it another entity that perhaps gets confused with this legend that in fact I can't assure whether it exists or not? I just wanted to share what happened to us and all those details that make up an experience that might be something much deeper.
I can tell you that the feeling, you know, when you've just been scared and you have that feeling in your body, but it wouldn't go away. It was like the air was electrified, like you could feel it in the atmosphere. And night would come, and that place was not the same as during the day. It was even burdensome knowing that night was coming, and we had to go back to the apartment. We never rented that place again, a shame because it was a very nice place close to the beach. Cheap, but it came with a weeping woman included, it seems, so...
Thank you very much for making it to the end. I would like to know what you think about this story we presented today. Do you think it was the weeping woman or some entity with a similar appearance? See you in a few days, and as always, I send a big hug to everyone.